President Trump has tweeted, Prime Minister Netanyahu has confirmed it, that they've arrived at a deal and the Israeli hostages could potentially be released very soon.
This is a lifeline that Trump is throwing Netanyahu, because in fact, he cannot accomplish his stated goal of obliterating and completely destroying Hamas.
Do you think a flare-up with Iran could happen?
Yes, I do. I think that the so-called 12-day war is really probably only an intermission. Trump has accepted Israel's bogus definition of Iran's civilian nuclear program as a nuclear weapons program.
Dr. A.Q. Khan, the Pakistani military scientist, some of his sort of blueprints are used by Iran over here as well.
A.Q. Khan stole those documents from a company called Urenco, and the CIA knew that he stole the stuff, and they let him leave the country with it. The Pakistanis started playing a double game by about 2005, and the Americans started saying, hey, wait a minute, by about 2007, but they could never figure out what to do about it.
Did the Americans at the time have a handle on Pakistan's nuclear program? Were they tracked? Was there a real fear that these bombs could get into the hands of terrorists?
The Americans worked with the Pakistanis to secure their nuclear weapons in different pieces and parts, in secure facilities around the country. We know that ISI supports the Lashkar-e-Taiba, for example, and other Pakistani terrorist groups, which of course is a real danger because there are completely fanatical lunatics in that country quite willing to start off a major confrontation like that if they could.
Scott Horton is an American author, journalist, and foreign policy analyst, widely recognized for his libertarian, anti-interventionist perspective on U.S. foreign policy. He serves as the editorial director of antiwar.com, is the host of the popular podcast Provoked, and has published many books which have detailed citations and challenge mainstream U.S. media's views on American wars around the world. Scott Horton, thank you for talking to ANI.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Can we just begin with the breaking news that's just been announced? President Trump has tweeted, Prime Minister Netanyahu has confirmed it, that they've arrived at a deal and the Israeli hostages could potentially be released very soon.
Yeah, I read that. And, I guess Jeremy Scahill from Drop Site News has direct contacts with the Hamas negotiators in Qatar, and they have confirmed that from their side of the story as well. That they have signed on to at least the first step here. So, and that first step, they say, is turning over all the hostages in exchange for Israeli withdrawal. Of course, Israel holds most of the cards there. We'll see just how far they're willing to withdraw. And we'll see just how serious Donald Trump is at letting the Israelis know that he means it this time, and they better really cease fire and see the thing through. I think one interpretation of the situation that I think probably holds up best is that this is a lifeline that Trump is throwing Netanyahu, because in fact, he cannot accomplish his stated goal of obliterating and completely destroying Hamas. As is well known since at least Vietnam, the cliche, all an insurgency has to do is not lose. And so as long as there's still a few alive, able to call themselves Hamas, then they're not all the way done then. And, Israel was apparently working very hard to find another country that would accept the Palestinian population so they could declare victory then if they just got rid of everybody, Hamas included. But they couldn't get any other country to go along with that and accept the Palestinians, who of course don't want to leave their land. And so, it seems like this is Trump really doing Netanyahu a favor and saying, listen, man, you might as well quit now because you're not really getting anywhere on this thing at this point. And it's hurting Israel, and it's hurting Israel's position in the United States, especially.
I didn't, in any of the announcements, I didn't hear anything about any potential disarmament of Hamas over here. So, I mean, if the final goal was to finally crush Hamas, I don't think that it's been announced yet. So what do you think phase 2 would be like?
Well, I'm not sure. And I have a lot of reading to do about the very recent developments here. But if you go back a few months, there was a Middle East proposal, even a year ago, I guess. There was a proposal that was being talked about by, maybe not quite a year ago, but there's a proposal being talked about by Egypt and Qatar and I'm not sure who else. If it was Saudi, I guess Saudi.
Hmm.
And they were talking about some sort of multinational Arab stewardship over
Hmm.
the strip, where
Hmm.
Hamas, under that rule, would not be disarmed, but would agree to be marginalized and essentially stand aside, let a new security force be created, and let, supposed technocrats appointed by those governments to come in and
Hmm.
oversee the reconstruction of the place. So something like that, where you have like a temporary Egyptian occupation, or at least, if not military occupation, civilian government officials sent in to administer things in agreement with Hamas, something like that,
Right.
um, would, I guess, be the best case type scenario that I could think of.
Okay. Just as an aside, what do you think? Where do you think this leaves Netanyahu's relationship, even President Trump's relationship with Iran? Because I spoke to Dr. Parsi a few weeks ago, and he still is holding true to his timeline that he thinks a potential second flare-up could still happen. And recently we just saw the snapback sanctions being put in place again on Iran. So. They achieved some sort of peace in Gaza, but do you think a flare up with Iran could happen?
Yes, I do. I think that the so-called 12-day war is really probably only an intermission, unfortunately. I agree with Dr. Parsi on that.
Hmm.
The problem is that Trump has accepted Israel's bogus definition of Iran's civilian nuclear program as a nuclear weapons program. So, you might remember where people cited the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, as
Hmm.
saying Iran has not broken out and begun an attempt to try to obtain a nuclear weapon. And if they did, they'd be more than a year away. And someone brought that up to Trump, and he said, well, I don't care what she says. So in other words, he is not going by what they are literally doing. He's essentially going with Israel's redefinition of terms, which is to say that to have a nuclear program at all is equivalent to, essentially, or just, fill in the dots, is the same thing as them making nuclear weapons. And
Hmm.
so once he adopted Israel's position and dropped bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities in the name of that position, it's pretty hard to back down from. Then again, Donald Trump can flip-flop on anything. To his credit, in this case, he could change his mind about that and say,
Hmm.
well, you know what? I set them back nice and good, and that's good enough for me. But the
Hmm.
problem is, of course, that the Iranians are not going to give up enrichment. And unfortunately, I've been working on some other projects, and I'm behind on this story too, to the degree to which they've attempted to restart the facilities at Natanz or any of that. I think Fordo has been pretty much put off limits to them. But I believe that from what the last thing I read, that much of Natanz, of the cascades of centrifuges there, that all survived the
Hmm.
attack. I know they lost the main part, the most important part of their conversion facility at Isfahan. Without
Hmm.
that, they can't turn the metal to uranium hexafluoride gas or back into metal again from uranium hexafluoride gas. So without that step, that crucial step, their electricity program and everything else is going to be pretty stymied.
Right.
However, um, they have mastered the fuel cycle for 20 years now, almost. And
Hmm.
they had announced right after the war that this isn't going to stop us. We already have a new secret facility we're working on, and we're working on setting up new cascades of centrifuges, and we're going to keep going. Now, Trita Parsi and myself and many others have been warning literally for a generation now that Iran's position here is a latent nuclear deterrent, right? They're a threshold state, meaning they proved that they had mastered the fuel cycle, but they had not gone so far as to make weapons grade uranium or nuclear weapons. And
Hmm.
so they never explicitly said this, but the, inferred bluff here was, don't attack us and we won't make a nuclear weapon. And the
Yes.
American position was, if you make a nuclear weapon, we'll attack you. So that was the basis for a perfect standoff. It's just that that wasn't good enough for Israel, right? Now the question is, after the 12-day war, so-called, of June, there was a real break there in time where, 10 weeks or more than that,
Hmm.
12, 15 weeks, where the IAEA was not there. And the
Right.
chain of surveillance of Iran's nuclear material was broken. And so I'm not going to like sit here and accuse them based on no evidence, but I think we'd be fools to just preclude the possibility that they are going to go ahead and make nukes now. That was the threat, that if you call our bluff, we're going to go ahead and make nukes then. So don't call our bluff.
Right.
You know, take our latent deterrent as deterrent enough. But America did not do that. So I don't know that they're making nukes now, but I know that there's been a break in the chain of custody, and that for them to break out and begin to make a nuclear weapon, if they make a simple gun type nuke, could be, you know, fairly easy and require minimal testing. They didn't even test the Hiroshima bomb. The Trinity test was of the Nagasaki implosion bomb only. So they knew the Hiroshima bomb would work just through the equations. It was simple enough. So there is a danger that they're making a nuke now. On the other hand, the good news is, at least they've said, that nothing has changed. The previous Ayatollah and the current Ayatollah have both issued religious edicts, fatwas, that say that God says weapons of mass destruction are haram. Forget it. We're not doing it. And I have to say, they've been pretty conservative about it all this time. And so it's quite possible that they're not going to go that far. That, I don't know what the hell is the use of a nuclear deterrent, a latent deterrent that stays latent once your bluff is called, right? Maybe, I guess there's some possibility that it really wasn't ever even meant to be a latent deterrent, that really it was only supposed to be an electricity program. Or maybe another interpretation was it was meant to be a latent deterrent, but having had their bluff called, the Ayatollah simply recognizes that American power is such that we can have total air dominance over their country, and that we can really bomb them, and including bomb their capital city, even without nuclear weapons. We can rain massive destruction on their country, on their military, on their nuclear facilities, at will, essentially. And that in the time that it would take them to break out and make a nuke, that they get caught and the next phase of the war would begin. That's, you know, part of, it makes sense, at least it was inferred, that was part of their thinking this whole time. No point in breaking out to make a nuke, because then America will attack us. So we'll just try to deter them by telling them, hey, don't make us break out and make a nuke by attacking us. You see, again, the contradiction there, the catch-22 in the thing. So anyway, sorry for the long answer, but the point being that the issue is unresolved. Trump says for them to have a nuclear program at all is the same thing as them making nuclear bombs. And they're saying, we're not making nuclear bombs, which again, they may be, but they're saying they're not, but they're also saying that it's just the highest matter of national sovereignty and independence and pride that they have this enrichment capability, and they will not give it up no matter what, even if it means war comes again. So where does that lead? It leaves us with the threat of another unnecessary conflict that we really didn't have to have in the first place, but based on the suppositions of the Trump administration at this point only makes sense.
Now, just adding to what you're saying, there are three facets, Mr. Horton, I want you to consider. The IEA had also said that they'd achieved 60% enrichment, that you need about 80% odd or 90% enrichment to actually have a bomb. So that's one factor of it. The second one is the snapback sanctions that have happened, that happened just during the UN General Assembly that was going on. So that means you've lost that chain of custody, because IEA inspectors can't come in once the sanctions are there. And the third is also sort of like the belligerent statements coming out of Netanyahu's office, where he said that they could come up with intercontinental ballistic missiles. We've also seen Iran's sort of ballistic missile production as well, and they are capable. I mean, they did overwhelm Israel's air defenses. So a bunch of these statements and a bunch of these facts that have also aligned over here, one does fear that this could be the next flashpoint in Iran-Israel war. And if that were to happen, can Israel do it without America's intervention and America's help over here?
Okay, well, a lot there. So first of all, on the 60% enriched uranium, as you note, that's still far short of weapons grade. They could have continued to enrich. That is, when we say percent uranium, we mean uranium-235 isotope. That's the sweet stuff that you use for your energy program or your weapons program there. So 60%, if it's not weapons grade, but it's far above electricity grade or medical isotope grade, which is 20%, then what's the purpose of it? Well, the purpose of it was as a bargaining chip to negotiate away. This uranium can be diluted back down again to the proper percent to burn in your centrifuges, pardon me, to burn in your nuclear reactors. So if you go back and look at the timeline, you'll see that in December of 2020, the Israelis, using the MEK communist terrorist cult, assassinated the director of Iran's nuclear program, a man named Fakhrizadeh, with a remote-controlled machine gun, actually. Then at that time, that was when they began enriching up to 20% again. And then, which is still technically explainable for civilian purposes. You need that for targets for your medical isotope reactor. So that is for radiation for cancer treatment, or for, they do like the radioactive dye that you can put in, they can see your circulatory system and stuff, that kind of thing. So, but then in April of 2021, the Israelis did a sabotage attack at Natanz, and they took credit for it. So that's no conspiracy or whatever. They said that they did it, and they blew up some facilities at the electrical generation station outside. And in response to that, the Iranians began enriching up to 60%. The point of which was blatantly to try to get the then new Biden administration to get back into negotiations, to get back into the JCPOA, which is the nuclear deal of 2015 that Barack Obama had passed when Joe Biden was his right-hand man, was vice president. So they were saying, hey, this is more or less your deal. It was Blinken and Sullivan and all the same people in the Biden administration had been the same ones who negotiated the thing. And so they said, Biden had two choices. He could either go with what Trump was doing, which was the massive, which he had torn up the deal, and plus had added what they called the crippling sanctions regime on Iran, or you could go back to diplomacy. And so Biden had that choice, and he chose in 2021 to continue with Trump's belligerence rather than trying to go back to the Obama policy of negotiation. But so that was the reason for the 60%. And in fact, and this goes now to the snapback, there's a provision in the JCPOA, which, let me go back. In 2015, this JCPOA was not quite a treaty because they could not get it past 2/3 of the United States Senate, which they would need. But so what they did was they passed it as a political agreement on an international level, which is a thing, but they got the UN Security Council to stand by the whole thing. Now, in the deal, though, there was no veto power like you would normally have at the UNSC. So it was, in other words, America, Britain, and France, our allies, outnumbered China and Russia on the UNSC. So all America ever had to do was convince our allies to agree with us on any part of this deal and how it was to be implemented, whatever, and we would get our way. That was part of the deal. But when America withdrew from the deal, there was actually a part of the JCPOA that says that if America leaves the deal, then Iran is allowed to cease abiding by some of its strictures. So it doesn't say they have the right to leave the deal altogether, but they have the right to stop abiding by some of its limitations. So in other words, when they started to enrich up to 20% again and up to then 60%, they were actually still within the JCPOA. Even though they were violating some limits in it, it said they could in the event that the Americans broke the deal first, which of course Donald Trump had done in 2018, based on a bunch of Israeli propaganda about their attempt to make a nuclear bomb. And so the snapback sanctions here are now the result not of Iran really violating the JCPOA, other than in the direct aftermath of the war, kicking the IAEA inspectors out of the country for a few months. And so now they've issued these snapback sanctions, when of course the point is, if the UN Security Council, America and its allies, wanted to be charitable here, they could say, okay, well, you know what? Israel did launch an aggressive war here. And so in context, it's understandable that you would kick the inspectors out. Maybe we want them back in there as soon as possible, right? But, what is implementing the snapback sanctions other than another provocation, right?
Right.
Seems like, at least potentially. And then now you talk about Netanyahu's claims about intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
Well, it is true that they have launched rockets into space and I think successfully put some satellites up there. Now, I had read a thing years ago from, I think, the the Federation of Atomic Scientists, I think it was, that said that, look, I know people are paranoid about this, but these rockets truly are designed to deliver payloads to space of satellites, and they're really not designed to travel, in intercontinental distances to deliver weapons, and they would be designed differently if they were, et cetera. On the other hand, that's a lot of the same technology, building a
Right.
three-stage rocket and being
Mm.
able to deliver a warhead to North America. Problem
Mhm.
is, they don't have a nuclear bomb to marry to a three-stage missile, even if they had secretly developed one, which we have no real intelligence
Yes.
that says they have developed an offensive missile like that. We would know that, and we wouldn't be relying on the Israelis to let us know. That would have
Mm.
been the CIA would have put that in the New York Times already if
Yep.
they had any inkling of that. And then secondly, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to make a miniaturized gun type nuke, which is what they almost always make uranium nukes, are almost always gun type nukes, which is you take a uranium slug and you fire it down essentially a long barrel into a uranium target. And that's what
Yeah.
causes supercritical mass. Whereas virtually all missile delivered nuclear warheads in the world are implosion bombs,
Mm.
where you have multiple explosions coming in at the same time to implode a plutonium pit in order
Yes.
to cause a fission reaction there. And so it would be extremely unorthodox for the Iranians to figure out a way to take a uranium gun type nuke and miniaturize it and marry it to a three-stage rocket and get it here to the United States, particularly with the US not knowing that they had that capability, and unable to do anything about it before it was too late. I mean, this is just comic book stuff. As we just saw, the Iranians have virtually no air defense. Israel, through their agents inside the country, through sabotage and just through intelligence gathering, and
Yeah.
through must be obviously the sloppiness of Iranian security forces. All their anti-aircraft missiles were taken out in the first few waves of attacks, and they were left helpless. America and Israel had air, not just control, but total dominance over the
Mm.
country, over at least most of the country. I don't know about in the places they weren't even flying, whether there
Mm.
were any, SM-300s left up there, but they were
Mm.
no match for Israeli and American aircraft. They didn't even take a shot at American aircraft in June when they flew the B-2s in. So they are very overmatched and they know it. So, as I've been telling people for a long time, if you discount all the Israeli propaganda about the insanity of the Ayatollah and just assume he's a normal guy trying his best to be the supreme overlord of Persia right now, what are you going to do with a problem like the United States of America?
Mm.
They're not going away. They got 1,500 H bombs deployed. They rule the seven seas and the four oceans and all of international trade and all of international diplomacy. And they're in Israel's pocket and they got you in their sights. Then at best, the dude abides, right? He's going to try to survive this somehow. He doesn't have the capability to do anything, major and tricky and destructive. In fact,
Mm.
as Max Blumenthal pointed out on our show Provoked last night, that when Hamas launched their attack on October 7th, some of their guys got even pretty close to Tel Aviv before
Mhm.
they were turned back. Now, if Iran had been behind that and launched a full missile salvo at Tel Aviv at that same time, and
Wonderful
Hezbollah
win.
had jumped
Yeah.
in with a full missile salvo at the same time, if that had all been coordinated by the Supreme Ayatollah and his insane Shiite dreams of regional revolution or whatever it is, then Israel might have really gotten hurt badly and may have had to really sue for peace on Hamas's terms, or it would have been a whole different situation. But
Mm.
instead, no, it was just Hamas, the local gang that rules the Israeli prison there in Gaza, broke out and caused some havoc for one day. And Iran was not in on it and was not ready for it and did not jump in to help participate in it. And nor did Hezbollah for at least, a few days until the Israelis started looking their way too.
Yeah.
And so, the Israeli kind of narrative about Iran and their danger even to Israel, much less to everybody else in the region or the people of North America. It's all very overwrought compared to the reality. And the biggest gains that Iran has made in the last, 25 years of the century is when George W. Bush gave them Iraq and when Barack Obama made Damascus far more dependent on them for
Mm.
an extra decade and a half before Damascus finally fell to Al Qaeda last December.
Mhm. I'm glad that you said put everything in context over here. Now, I want to talk about one more act of Israeli belligerence that sort of almost seems like realigned the geopolitics of this region completely when they went ahead and did their bombing of Hamas leadership in Qatar. What followed then we saw from India, this is from the New Delhi's perspective, what we saw was the immediate announcement of a Saudi-Pakistani mutual defense pact. So what came to your mind the first time you heard this?
Well, yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, the question was whether America knew about it or not and approved it or not.
Hmm.
Um, as I'm sure you know, America's largest military base in the Middle East is in Qatar, the Al Ulid, I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, Ulid
Hmm.
Air Base. It's also the headquarters of Central Command. So
Yeah.
it's a bigger base than even our army bases in Kuwait or Navy base in Bahrain and, all the various Army and Air Force bases in Saudi and UAE and Morocco and, Oman and the rest. And
Hmm.
so, and Oman, Qatar is the one of the the Sunni Gulf Arab states that has
Hmm.
the closest ties to Iran because
Yes.
they share a gas field beneath the Persian Gulf. So they have this vast economic interest in common, and they have for many decades. And so sometimes they're even like the back channel to talk to Iran because they're
Hmm.
closer to Iran than, say, the government in Bahrain or Saudi, I guess. Um,
Hmm.
Now, as far as Pakistan and Saudi Arabia announcing their deal, I think my understanding always was that they kind of had a de facto alliance, if not an official one. And there had
Hmm.
always been a question of whether Pakistan would even furnish a nuclear weapon to Saudi Arabia. They are, after all, a nuclear weapon state outside of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And there was a question of whether, the civil war, the Sunni Shia civil war that W. Bush touched off in 2003, which was really another way to say it, was the Riyadh Tehran civil war for dominance in the region that was touched off by the invasion of Iraq, whether that would get bad enough that Saudi might feel like they needed a nuke. And then the question was whether they would just go to Pakistan and ask for one and whether the Pakistanis would give them one. And so that has been floated as an option for Saudi Arabia for many years now. So I think that this probably doesn't signify too much of a change. I don't know that for sure. I mean, maybe this was meant by those two states to, signify something very profound in a new era of their relationship or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I actually have not had a chance to read too closely into this, so I don't know if this was really like a war guarantee and a full treaty of military alliance or how far it went.
Hmm.
Um,
The irony
but
over here that Dr. A.Q. Khan, the Pakistani military scientist, some of his sort of blueprints were, that's what's assumed. Some of those nuclear blueprints are used by Iran over here as well. So
uh-huh,
it's a
that's
nice,
true.
nice deadly
Yeah.
game that's going on over here. It also, is this a clear sort of example of sort of growing American retrenchment from the area and every region over here in the Gulf sort of looking out for its own?
I'm not sure about that. I think every state over there was looking out for themselves as best as they could in the previous eras of Bush and Obama and Biden, for that matter,
Hmm.
earlier Trump. Um, you know, yeah, no, I think I don't think that the Donald Trump administration has truly attempted to back away from their so-called commitments over there. It
Hmm.
could be that, there's a spirit at least, maybe just, a bunch of public relations about America first and American retrenchment that's not
Hmm.
truly playing out on the ground as far as American power. But it could be that maybe states in the region are picking up on that and they get the idea that the American people want to come home and then maybe falsely assume that the American empire's days are numbered in the region.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's been the case for a very long time that America has really run out of major interests in the Middle East, as even bin Laden and I think Saddam Hussein too had said. I know bin Laden had said, like, what are we going to do with the oil? Drink it? Right? In other words, it's going to be for sale no matter who's in charge.
Mm,
So in the battle days, it was a matter of keeping the Soviet Union out because they could dominate all those resources and deprive them from deprive the West of them and all this stuff. But we don't have any, global commie hegemon that threatens us like that. So in fact, we could just completely withdraw from the Middle East and let Exxon negotiate their own deals. If they want to work with the Iraqis or the Saudis or the Iranians or whoever, fine. We should lift all sanctions, allow American corporations to do business over there, and trust that that'll be just fine. We don't need to have American political and military dominance in the region. We don't really have an excuse for it anymore. There was this great economic geographer, I think he called himself, from Princeton University, who did a study about the $10 trillion that America had spent from, I think it was 1976 through 2007 on
mm,
quote unquote securing Middle Eastern oil. And in fact, I saw an update. Someone cited him again recently, where it was an updated study that went, into the 20 teens or something. And it was, in the 15 or 20 trillion dollars or whatever it is we spent over there, far more than we've ever spent on Middle Eastern oil in that same time period.
right.
So it's just completely crazy that we would do this. And then
Mm,
so the American people are getting the idea and more, and it's true that
yes.
what's it all about then? Because it ain't the Iraqi Kurds, it's the Israelis. And it was the Israelis that insisted that we get rid of Saddam Hussein for them. And then it was the Israelis who said, oh no, now Iran has been empowered and their best friends have taken over Baghdad. So now we need you to get rid of Bashar al-Assad for us. So then we
Mm,
got rid of Bashar al-Assad for them. And now they say, oh, good. I mean, oh no, now Al-Qaeda rules Syria and we have to keep bombing Syria. And we got to, I don't know what the hell they're going to do there. But we're going to have a continuing crisis with bin Ladenites in Syria. I mean, the current leadership there is very tame, which just means their days are numbered because they're surrounded by a bunch of bin Ladenite head chopping lunatics who are
yeah.
sure to overthrow their own leaders and install something much more like the Islamic State that
Yes.
we saw in 2014 through 17 there. So
Yeah.
um,
Where we
I'm
saw
sure
Al-Julani
everyone
in
will be
the
regretting
UN.
their regime change then.
Now, we saw Al-Julani at the UN this time, and this was Baghdadi's lieutenant, I think, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, who had a portion of the ISK of the Islamic State, and now the ruler of Syria over there. So
That's right. And he
definitely,
admitted that he killed American soldiers in Iraq War II.
exactly. And I'm glad that you brought up Afghanistan in that area. So before this interview, I was researching a lot of your work, and I even went ahead and watched that 10.5 hour odd episode that you had with Lex Friedman. And my only grouse on that episode is that you were about to talk about Afghanistan, and then you changed topic and went back to Iraq. So
Yeah.
maybe I want to press you on a little bit more about some history of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and this sort of, I don't know, would you call it a Faustian bargain with Pakistan or whatever deal they had with
Sure.
Pakistan? What happened in the months after 9/11 and when American troops had really cornered Al Qaeda fighters in that sort of mountainous Tora Bora region and had bin Laden in its sights?
Yeah. All right. So yes, you're right. We did get that. We did give that war short shrift on the Lex Friedman show. Libya as well
Yes.
got neglected, um, just for time and attention. And this was something that I struggled with in writing my book. When I started writing enough already, when I got to the Afghanistan chapter, I couldn't wrap it up in a timely enough fashion, and it ended up becoming my first book. Fool's Errand was
Hmm.
the extended chapter two. Just became a whole book. Then I went back and I felt a little better about writing a much more truncated version of chapter two on Afghanistan so that I could quickly change the subject to Iraq, because, of course, that is where all the excitement took place during that era, right?
Yes.
Afghanistan was on the other side of Iran from here, right? And was just always the back burner, back page of the newspaper type issue compared to
But it was
Iraq.
the predicate event though, which led to all of that, right?
Yes, yes. Um, At the same time, though, if you're telling the story about how Iraq led to Libya and Syria and the rest, Afghanistan's a pain and a distraction, unfortunately. So that's the way that breaks out. Same thing for Somalia. Somalia is a hugely important story of the war on terrorism, but it's even the whole war on terrorism writ small. But it doesn't take place directly in the chain of events when you go from Iraq to Libya to Syria, etc. Again, Somalia is a sideshow off screen, kind of. So that's why those stories end up getting neglected a lot of the time, because when I'm telling the story of how one war led to the next, led to the next, led to the next. And sometimes these tangents are too much to wrap them all up. Anyway, speaking of tangents, I'm on one now. Speaking about Afghanistan, okay? In the 1980s, starting with Jimmy Carter, but then under Ronald Reagan, America backed the Mujahideen, not just the local Afghan fighters against the Soviets and their commie sock puppet dictator there, but foreign fighters from around the Middle East, from America, from Chechnya, from the Philippines, from Indonesia, from everywhere, came to fight to kill the godless commies. And America, Saudi, and Pakistan supported them. Now, in the aftermath of that war, most of the foreign jihadis either went home to go get a job or go to prison, or they went on to fight in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. And this is where Al-Qaeda's, bones were really made, was fighting in the Balkans with Bill Clinton and the United States on their side. Now, in the early 1990s, the warlords destroyed Afghanistan after the commies were gone. Then it was General Dostum, who had served the Russians.
The Tajik one, yeah.
Versus Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Jalaluddin Haqqani and these other warlords. Now, the Taliban actually rose up. Many of them were veterans of the war as well, especially their older members. But many of their younger guys had been too young to have fought in the war. They'd been raised in refugee camps in Pakistan. And so they came really to quell the violence of the warlords who were just tearing the country apart and were notoriously a bunch of disgusting child rapists.
Yes.
So the Taliban came to power. They got their initial start by freeing kidnapped young children from local warlords. And then the word spread that the Taliban is going around freeing kidnapped children from local warlords. So everybody said, hey, free my kids from my warlord too. And then their power kind of, continued to expand across the country, and all with the support of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and the United States of America under William Jefferson Clinton. And the idea was that they wanted the they wanted the Afghan Taliban to conquer the entire country, to completely destroy the Northern Alliance, so that they could build an oil pipeline from Turkmenistan across Afghanistan and across Pakistan, I guess through the mountains, and then to the port of Karachi. And this would be a way to screw the Russians by piping Caspian oil any direction except north through Russia or directly south through Iran. We want to go, they did the BTC pipeline west through from Azerbaijan to Georgia and Turkey to the Mediterranean. And then they wanted to do this pipeline from Turkmenistan across Afghanistan to Pakistan, which the whole thing was crazy. I mean, think about, Afghanistan's the size of Texas. It's absolutely humongous, and it's all wild and bad lands. And there's nothing like the security situation necessary, nor could there be in our lifetimes, the security situation to provide for a pipeline across the entire country like that. But that was the motive at the time. And the whole time during the 1990s, America was playing a double game with these Al-Qaeda guys. Some of the CIA is backing them in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. As long as they're killing Serbs and Russians, they're fine. And in fact, they were training the Uyghurs and using them against China as well. At the same time, these same groups had already turned on the United States, and they were attacking American targets here in America, as well as American targets in the Gulf. And just very quickly, they killed Rabbi Kahane in 1990. They blew up a hotel in Yemen in 1992. They blew up the World Trade Center in 1993. They got caught in the Bojinka plot in 1995 with the plot to kill Bill Clinton and the Pope, blow up 12 planes over the Pacific and kamikaze 10 planes into American targets in the United States, the plan that became September 11th. In 96, they bombed the Khobar Towers, which Saudi and the U.S. government blamed on Iranian-backed Shiite Hezbollah, Saudi Hezbollah, which is a bunch of crap when it was bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed who did it. And then they did the Africa embassies in 98. And there was actually a failed attack on the USS The Sullivans with a dinghy before the successful attack of 2000 there. And there's also a question about Flight 800 in 1998, which was shot down off the coast of Long Island. And then, but they're, floated separate conspiracies about what may have happened, including maybe the Navy shot it down, or maybe it was a bomb planted on board or whatever, when it seems like the most likely explanation was a shoulder-fired rocket. And these would have been probably one given to them by Ronald Reagan back in the days. And all these attacks were happening by the bin Ladenites, essentially Egyptian Islamic Jihad and the bin Laden group that ended up merging into Al-Qaeda all through the 1990s, while our government is still backing them against their enemies in the old world. And so then when the Bush administration comes in, they're so hell-bent on going to Baghdad that they don't want to hear anything about going to Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden. They look at that as a big distraction, when the point is, keep your eye on the ball. We want to get Saddam Hussein. What are these bin Ladenites going to do? Set off a truck bomb in Africa somewhere? Who cares, right? As they said at the time, terrorism is a small price to pay for being a superpower. So we get to rule the world and we lose a couple of hundred of natives, at our embassy somewhere overseas. Who cares? Go on ahead. Then after September 11th, they say, okay, now we got to write ourselves a writ to do whatever we want in the world. Of course, first they have to go to Afghanistan. Many people in the cabinet, Rumsfeld particularly, but also his deputy, Paul Wolfowitz, and others were saying we should start bombing Iraq right now. And Bush and Cheney had to tell them, hey, pipe down, enough of the Iraq stuff. We're going to Iraq. But obviously, and Tony Blair of Great Britain insisted, George, obviously we have to go to Afghanistan first, right? Otherwise, people are going to get the wrong idea here, man. So they go to Afghanistan. But then, if you remember back how it was at the time, the assumption was, and the explanation was, that the Taliban is Al-Qaeda is the Taliban. And they did it. And we're going to go get them. And we won't discriminate between the terrorists and the nations who harbor them. Now, the thing of it is, the Taliban were willing to negotiate over Osama bin Laden and his men. But Bush didn't want to negotiate. First, they said, give us some evidence and we'll turn him over to a Muslim country. Or we'll even hold a trial for him here in Afghanistan ourselves. Bush said, no, forget it. They said, well, give us some evidence, just enough like for an indictment, make us believe you. And we'll turn him over to any Muslim country in the world, which of course could have been Jordan or Malaysia or anywhere where they would have landed the plane on the tarmac and immediately taken off for Virginia again. Right?
You're saying Mullah Omar, the head of the Taliban at the time, was saying this to the Bush administration. Yeah, okay.
Yes. Then they said, we'll turn him over to the Pakistanis. And the Pakistanis said no, probably at American behest, but I don't know that, but that's my assumption. Then after the bombs started dropping on October the 8th, they said, okay, we don't need any proof, and we'll turn him over to any third country in the world, except probably Israel, although they didn't even say that. They said, we'll turn him over to any third country in the world, which of course, there's so many countries in the world that are absolute tight military allies with the United States, where they would have been in absolutely safe hands and would have been extradited to the United States immediately. But the Bush government said, oh no, we don't want indictments and trials and convictions. This is a war. And so we don't want to have a captive turned over to us. We either want to kill them or nothing. And even then, they weren't so bent on killing them. And we know a lot of this because Bush told his people to just turn over the notes from the National Security Council to the reporter Bob Woodward. Now, Woodward is a bit of a fabulist on some things, but in this case, they just gave him the NSC notes. And he just goes through there and he shows where the National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and the CIA were saying we ought to do everything we can to focus on just killing Arabs. We don't want to kill any locals. And we want to show and impress the Taliban the fact that we're only looking to kill friends of Osama bin Laden, actual foreign fighters here who are on his side. But if you separate yourselves and your regime from him, then you'll have no problem with us. But Donald Rumsfeld at the Pentagon and the others, Dick Cheney and the others, overruled that. And the reason why was because they didn't want to solve the problem quickly. They did not want to make a deal with the Taliban, said, there he is, get him. And then we get him, and then the American people think the war is over. And Donald Rumsfeld said this explicitly in the cabinet meetings. We don't want the American people to think that killing bin Laden is victory. And in fact, if we don't kill him, that's not defeat. And in fact, he proposed maybe we should start bombing Baghdad right now because we want the American people to understand this war is nowhere near over. And it's going to take place over an extended space and an extended period of time. And the last thing in the world they wanted was for a bomb to drop on bin Laden's head and for the American people to say, well, that's what you get for messing with us. You're dead by Christmas time and our boys come home and celebrate and that's it. We don't want that. We want to keep the war going. And just like in the book 1984, they needed to keep that figure of Emmanuel Goldstein, the permanent enemy, out there threatening constantly. If bin Laden was dead, that would have been a huge psychological relief to the American people, that the guy that did it paid the price. Now you're trying to change the subject to a different guy that didn't do it? That wouldn't work nearly as well. And so they let bin Laden go. And I make the case in Fool's Errand and enough already that the CIA on the ground and the Delta Force on the ground, they just could not understand why they were denied the resources and the reinforcements they needed and that were available that could have helped them to corner bin Laden. They had him cornered on 3 sides, with the 4th side being the Pakistani border. And then, as I'm sure even, I don't know what's the translation in Hindi, but as I'm sure you must have heard 10 million times yourself, once bin Laden and his friends slipped across the border into Pakistan, it was just like a magic spell, or it was like the Millennium Falcon jumped into hyperspace. And there's nothing we can do about it now, except that you got the Delta Force right there, top tier special operations forces, and they have helicopters. So what the hell do you mean you can't chase them into a friendly nation where they had already picked up the phone and told Pervez Musharraf, remember how your policy was backing the Taliban? Well, now it isn't anymore. Now your policy is doing whatever we say or we'll kill you. And he said, fine. You might remember the phrase was, we'll return your country to the Stone Age if you don't fall right in line, which of course, Pakistan's backing of the Taliban up to that point had not been in contravention of American goals. Now, America had stopped tacitly or participating in that after the Africa embassy bombings of '98, but they had never ordered Musharraf to stop. Musharraf came to power in a coup in, I believe, '97. They never ordered him to stop backing the Taliban that he was in defiance of or anything. So he, of course, flipped right over. And in fact, there's a book by Robert Grenier, who was the CIA station chief in Islamabad. And he said that he had worked directly with the Pakistani Army and Frontier Corps on what we call deconfliction, which is so that we're in constant communication so that when our guys chase the bad guys across the border, your guys don't mistakenly kill our guys thinking they're the bad guys. Does that make sense? Yes. So he's saying, we expect the Delta Force to come across the border on Al-Qaeda's heels. And we're going to have deconfliction set up with you to make sure that you don't accidentally shoot our Delta Force.
We saw these reports, the rendition reports, essentially. They are deep rendition sort of operations that happened in that entire NWFP area.
Well, that's a separate thing. Now, the renditions is when they, climb in your window at night and secret you off to a prison camp. At this point, I'm talking about the war. I'm talking about bin Laden on horseback, escaping from the battlefield, and Delta Force is forbidden from chasing him into Pakistan. They could have solved the problem right there. They were not allowed to follow them in. Even, as I'm saying, even though Robert Grenier, the CIA chief, had already worked out deconfliction with the Pakistani military in the expectation that we were going to corner them now and kill him. And they did not do that. They let him escape. He lived until 2011. Now, the reason they did that is so they could tell my mom that Saddam could give his weapons to Osama, and Osama could give them to his men to use against you, lady, in your suburbs. And that was what it was all about, was lying to the American people. Bush would say over and over and over again, imagine September 11th. Except this time, the bin Ladenites armed with Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. They said that over and over for a year and a half to make the American people, one, believed that Saddam Hussein had somehow been responsible for September 11th and or the anthrax attack, and two, that he was going to attack us again. As people would say readily, regurgitating television, they would say, well, are you saying we should just wait around and let Iraq attack us first? Which, of course, the answer is yes. You don't start wars. What are we, the Imperial Japanese? And secondly, this is called begging the question, the logical fallacy where you build your conclusion into your premise. And we're just now pretending that Saddam Hussein is threatening the United States, that he means to attack the United States, that Iraq could be a threat to the United States of America anytime in the next 700 years. Are you kidding me? That's like saying Arkansas is going to attack the United States. No, they're not. That's completely stupid. But so they had to lie, and they lied and they lied and they used fear. These people are going to kill you if you don't let me protect you from them. And they just turned it up to 11, man. It's hard to even replicate. If you think about the propaganda that the Israeli public is inundated with on a daily basis about how the whole world is trying to kill them, that's basically what we were being told at that time. Orange alert, red alert, terror alert, emergency 11. You could die at any moment. Entrapped idiots from the Muslim bookstore paraded on TV in fake terrorism plots. Oh, look, Saddam Hussein, he keeps coming with the terrorism plots against us, and just driving up this fever pitch on AM radio news. If you drive for a living, you listen to AM radio news at the top of the hour, and they would say, Al-Qaeda has a terrorist plot to bomb a bank somewhere in New York or New Jersey. Oh, that's really useful. And so they call out all the SWAT teams and all the National Guard and everybody to stand around at every bank branch in New York and New Jersey. Yeah, right. You see, this is just theater. They, at one time, I'll never forget, I know where I was driving when I heard them say, Al-Qaeda, Intel CIA has uncovered an Al-Qaeda plot to attack a school somewhere in Texas. My man, there's got to be 50,000 schools in Texas.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. Texas is bigger. Texas is probably about the size of at least half of India, maybe more.
No,
Texas is huge.
Maybe not half of India. It's a big country though. Definitely big as
it is. It's a subcontinent even.
it's about as big as Afghanistan.
They're pretty close. Yeah. And so, but anyway, the point being that they were just trying to scare the hell out of everybody's mom and dad to let them do this in Iraq. And that's the answer of why they even did the regime change in Kabul, why they even conflated the Taliban with Al-Qaeda, and why they said we have to overthrow the government in Kabul, we have to install the Northern Alliance in power, and we have to build them a democracy and a Westphalia nation state, bring them into the 21st century and all of this stuff. You know, unlike Texas, which West Texas is pretty desertous, but in, you know, the eastern half of the state, at least, there's a lot of water and forests and natural resources everywhere. Afghanistan is just badlands, right? They got deserts like California. They got mountains like Colorado, right? And extreme temperatures of all kinds, barely any arable farmland. And what there is completely dominated by poppy crops ever since the 1980s war destroyed any other agriculture in the country. So, and the people are, you know, at least, let's say, in a completely alien society to ours. It's a warrior culture of people who like to fight and are no more likely to accept a foreign occupation for the long term than Texans would be. And in fact, maybe even less likely than that. And so, and this is why they never really devoted full-scale resources to the thing, is because they knew it was never going to work. The whole point of the war was just to extend it, to keep it going, to not be the one in charge when the thing finally fell apart on their own watch. And that's not to say, by the way, that, oh, if only they had devoted more resources, it would have worked. A lot of people do say that. They say, oh, no, yeah, if we hadn't diverted our resources to Iraq, then Afghanistan would have gone much better. No, it would have gone much worse, much faster. Because the more we escalated that war, the worse it got in every way. our troops show up out in the countryside where they had not been before. Now they have a whole new group of enemies who were not their enemies before. And so that was the way that whole war worked. So it's wrong to say that diverting the resources away costs the war effort. That's not right. And that's not what I mean. But what I do mean to say is just look at the effort that they put in, right? 50,000 troops, mostly. They had 50,000 or fewer troops in the whole country.
Yeah.
Doing, pinprick night raid strikes against alleged bad guys. But in no way were they able to, even really rally an enemy force to fight and destroy, right? It was just a local insurgency of midnight fighters, right? Men who farm in the daytime and fight at night.
Now I'm going to push you a little bit over here, Mr. Horton, over here, because I need, sitting from New Delhi, this is a frustration that a lot of security analysts over here sort of voice all the time. A lot of American commentators, are different because you've actually gone deeper into this. Why is Pakistan given a free reign over here? Because
they're not. You hadn't asked about that part yet, but I have a whole section in my book about that.
Exactly. You talked about the Bojinka plot, Ramzi Youssef. You talk about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. You talk about Osama bin Laden, Abu Zubaydah. These are all this is the elite class of Al-Qaeda, all found in Pakistan. You have the startings of, the nuclear sort of issue with North Korea, in Iran, all have their origin stories written in Pakistan. You have Muammar Gaddafi sending nuclear material to Pakistan. All of this is documented in State Department cables. So you have these two huge bogies over here. What is this sort of love story that American presidents have with Pakistani military dictators?
Well, in the 1980s, it was all about sticking it to the commies. That was the enemy. And whoever we have to work with, fine. And they knew all along that the Pakistanis were developing nuclear weapons. And they tried to kind of dissuade them from it, but they weren't willing to make them stop because they needed their cooperation for the war in Afghanistan. That was the motivation there. In fact, if you go back one, A.Q. Khan stole those documents from a company called Urenco, which was like a joint international company. And the CIA knew that he stole the stuff, and they let him leave the country with it because they wanted to see where he'd go. And, they were part of that and let that happen. And then, yes, it's true that he sold aluminum tubes to North Korea, although I don't believe they ever did anything with them. All of their nuclear weapons have been made out of plutonium since then from their Soviet-built old Yongbyon reactor. So whatever experiments they ever did with enriching uranium doesn't seem to have had any effect on their nuclear weapons program. What they gave to Iran, it's true that Iran has used that, but again, not for nuclear weapons, just for a civilian program, at least so far. And Iran only turned to A.Q. Khan because Bill Clinton wouldn't let them buy light water reactors from China, which light water reactors produce waste that cannot be converted into nuclear weapons fuel. So Bill should have just let them build the light water reactors. We might have never had this controversy over their uranium enrichment or any of this whole time if he'd just done that. And then with Libya, he bought a bunch of junk from A.Q. Khan, and I don't know what he sold them, but whatever he had was just sitting in crates in warehouses because he didn't have the experts to put together any kind of nuclear program whatsoever, much less a nuclear weapons program. So just as far as that goes. But in my first book, Fool's Errand, I have, and I guess in enough already, I address this at least to some degree, I think. But definitely in Fool's Errand, I have a section of the book is called Pakistan's Role. And it explains how Afghanistan is Pakistan's strategic depth. In the event that they get into a nuclear war with India, they need to be able to retreat into Pakistan. And so it was in their interest the whole time that America was fighting to install a Tajik, Uzbek, and Hazara coalition alliance in Kabul at the expense of the Pashtuns. It made sense for the Pakistanis to keep the Afghan Pashtuns in play in the form of the Taliban insurgency, if nothing else, to keep the country destabilized and prevent the Northern Alliance from truly consolidating power over the land. Because if they did, they could preclude the Pakistanis access to the country in the event of an emergency. So that was their highest strategic priority. The Americans, I think, took a long time to figure this out, that the Pakistanis started playing a double game by about 2005, and the Americans started saying, hey, wait a minute, by about 2007, but they could never figure out what to do about it. They're completely dependent on the Pakistanis because of the mountain range there. You have to go all the way from the port of Karachi. You have to go, I think it's 700 miles up to the Khyber Pass to get into Afghanistan. So the only other route for American supplies into Afghanistan was the northern route through Russia, which they did not want to call in that favor. They didn't want to have to owe any favors to Vladimir Putin, so they avoided that as much as they could. Now, in 2012, there was an incident where the Americans caught the Pakistani army equipping Afghan Taliban on the border in Paktika province. And the Americans blasted them with, I think, an Apache gunship and killed them. And so the Pakistani military got pissed off and they closed the highway. And so for the entire year of 2012, America had to go through the northern route, with which Putin obliged and let America do that. So they were wholly dependent on the Pakistanis for that. Now, in 2009, Obama comes in, and there are, according to John Kiriakou, 29 al-Qaeda guys, actual Arab friends of bin Laden, hiding in Pakistan. And now Barack Obama, instead of sending in CIA guys with knives to cut these guys' throats or kidnap them out the window in the middle of the night, he sends in the drone warriors. And the drone warriors killed thousands of innocent people in their attempt to hunt down 30 guys. Now, in order to do this, Barack Obama makes a deal with the government of Pakistan. That time, I think it was Prime Minister Sharif, to allow him to do this. But part of that deal then was America had to help the Pakistanis launch their own civil war against the Pakistani Taliban, the Tariqi Taliban, up in the northern federally administered tribal territories in the Swat Valley. That killed 80,000 people. It just turned that whole area completely upside down and created a massive refugee crisis. A refugee crisis where, just like you had Afghan Taliban hiding out in Pakistan for safe haven, being supported by the Pakistani government, now you had Pakistani Taliban hiding out on the Afghanistan side of the border, being protected by the government in Kabul and used against the Pakistanis as well as against the Afghan Taliban. Now, one of those groups, a couple of years later in 2013, when it was all the fashion over in the Levant, hoisted the black flag and declared themselves loyal to the Islamic State. And that's what we now call ISIS Khorasan, or ISIS-K, was born out of Pakistani Taliban refugees from the Pakistani war that Obama helped them wage as a bribe for them letting him wage his drone war to kill a measly stinking 29 friends of Osama bin Laden who were supposedly still hiding in that country. And then another part of when Obama came in was he launched the massive surge of 2009 through 12, where he ended up sending 70,000 extra troops. People always say 30,000. Yeah, 30,000 after 40,000. He sent 70,000 extra troops to Afghanistan to vastly escalate the war, especially in Nangarhar in the east on the Pakistani border and down in the south in Helmand province and in Kandahar province. And there, you know, this completely ridiculous and retarded and bankrupt strategy, intellectually bankrupt strategy of counterinsurgency. This was going to be their little playland and their showcase to demonstrate how brilliant these army technicians and tacticians were, that they could go in, clear, hold, and build an area and convince the local women, children, and elderly, I guess, to hate and turn against their brothers, sons, fathers, and uncles and husbands, and regard them as the enemy, and accept American Marines from the other side of the planet with different skin and a different religion and a different language in every way to be their security force instead, and to regard their own men-kin as the enemy. Well, that's about as stupid as I just explained it to be. It's as stupid as it sounds. And guess what? It didn't work. All they did was kill a bunch of innocent people and then lose anyway. And so, of course, Helmand, you know, they launched this massive attack with the Marines in Sinjar that they took the town, but to no end. They ended up giving it back. Nothing happened there. That was the big test case. And then they didn't even try it in Kandahar City, which was supposed to be the victory in battle. And Petraeus went slinking home, the great American fraud that is General David Petraeus went slinking home with his tail between his legs, where he then got appointed to head of the CIA, where he tried to force the CIA to only ask Army officers how the war was going. Yeah. Which didn't work.
We saw
And
him
then he took
interview Al-Julani recently in the UN.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my
I was
God.
just going to say, then he took Al-Qaeda's side in Libya and then Syria
Yeah.
before he got caught leaking above top secret documents to a prostitute who was writing a book about what a great guy he was. And these were documents describing conversations he had with the president about American strategy and foreign policy, the highest level of classification that could possibly exist. And instead of getting life in prison, he got a slap on the wrist. And now he gets to go around, being an investment banker and parading around with a slayer of Americans who, David Petraeus helped arm up the Sunni insurgency in Mosul in 2004. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani was fighting for the Sunni insurgency in Mosul in 2004, killing American troops with guns that David Petraeus gave him. And then, it all comes full circle there. Anyway, so then, essentially, again, the war was an attempt to prop up this coalition of Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Hazaras, who are about 20% of the population each, making up 60% majority when combined, but against the 40% plurality population, the Pashtuns. And they're just never going to accept that. And even though the sock puppet president, the first one, Hamid Karzai, was a Pashtun, all that meant was that he appointed the very worst Pashtun warlords in the country to criminalize and brutalize these poor people, tyrannize them, steal from them, rape their children, murder their families, sell them drugs, and all the rest. And so it was just chaos. And, David Petraeus, speaking of the great American fraud, he at one point admitted that the local Pashtun culture or the Taliban's methods of dispute resolution, criminal and civil, are preferable to the local population compared to the American court system that we have built for them there.
Wow.
Okay, well, that's the end of the argument then, right? That we create a police chief, a mayor, and a governor, and they are criminals and child rapists and drug dealers and murderers. The Taliban comes and says, everybody sit on the blanket and let's talk this through, as per our custom for the last 6,000 years. And the people say, okay, let's do that. We'll sit on the blanket and talk this through.
Thank you,
So that's it. And that was America's war. And the whole thing, it was, first of all, because I'm an American, Americans got lied into that thing. And a lot of them got killed in that thing, including guys who are now friends of mine's, good friends, died over there. Friends of mine, fought really hard over there, damn near died, and did kill people because they signed up to protect this country from enemies that threaten it. Not because they signed up to be an errand boy for some agenda, but they got used and abused. And 2,500 of them almost got killed. And many tens of thousands of them got maimed.
Yes.
At the same time, they killed high tens of thousands, maybe more than 100,000 people there, maybe more than 2. I don't know if anyone really knows.
Yeah.
If we calculate the excess deaths, how many people died in the Afghan war that otherwise would not have, even under Taliban rule and the economic life as it was circa the year 2000 or something like that, it's in the high hundreds of thousands of people who died who otherwise would have lived from either just malnutrition or uncurable, or normally easily treatable diseases going untreated, and just overall deprivation, lack of quality of life.
Yeah.
And you can add in, all other things being equal, the advance in the quality of life that would have been taking place under Taliban rule had America stayed out the whole time. Just ipso facto, there would have been more hospitals. There would have been more roads. There would have been more schools, education for medical professionals and engineers and whatever else.
Yes.
All other things being equal, they would have had much more capital investment in actually building their society, which of course, that's a whole other part of the story too, is the giant scam of the State Department paying these
Mm.
contractors for all these absolutely ridiculous infrastructure projects that a local, actual, natural, or somewhat popularly supported government would never try to do. Like
Mm.
build a giant dam that
Yeah.
no one can operate in the middle of nowhere, where
Mm.
there's no electric lines to anywhere from there anyway. And the whole thing, you sink $10 billion into the desert.
Nation
Never
building stuff.
mind 10
Yeah.
million on a school here or there. I mean,
Yeah.
we got absolutely, they did road projects that you just would not believe. That, of course, went all completely to hell and were nothing but boondoggles the whole time. And the whole time with all that aid money going in many cases, probably most cases, directly to the Taliban, who are the ones accepting the money and then using it for their insurgency against the United States. You even have situations where you have convoys of American supplies headed way out to the countryside to an American firebase out there, and they're paying the Taliban to drive the front and rear car to provide security for the American convoy, to go
Right.
drop off the fuel where we're paying $1,000 a gallon or whatever it is to get the fuel out there. And then the Taliban takes all the money and buys weapons from the Afghan National Army to use to kill our guys.
I'm glad that you brought up the aid part, and I'm going to end on this. This is a final conclusion on this. So a lot of that aid also went to Pakistan, and a lot of that money, military aid, also was used in Pakistan's aggression towards India in all the conflicts that we have had. Now, you spoke about sort of the civil war that happened in Pakistan, or the serious unrest that happened in the late 2000s, early 2000s. Would you speculate? And I know there was a lot of reporting on mainstream US newspapers like the New York Times and all. Did the Americans at the time have a handle on Pakistan's nuclear program? Were they tracked? Was there a real fear that these bombs could get into the hands of terrorists?
Yes, I think that's always been a fear. And, the reporting has been that the Americans worked with the Pakistanis to secure their nuclear weapons in different pieces and parts, in secure facilities around the country where hopefully anybody ignorant enough to be a bin Ladenite would not be able to figure out what to do with it all, and would not be able to get their hands on it all and not be able to put it together in any useful way. So I don't know whether that's really true. It
Mm.
makes it much harder to use it as a nuclear deterrent if India, for example, is convinced that, hey, they can't even get their act together and get their nukes put together in a few days, we can whoop them by then or something like that. So
Mm.
it makes sense that they would keep at least some of their nukes at the ready, which of course is a real danger because there are completely fanatical lunatics in that country
Yeah.
who, would be quite willing to start off a major confrontation like that if they could.
Yep.
Although, and look, it's the age-old question when it comes to these intelligence agencies and these terrorist groups is, we know that ISI supports the Lashkar-e-Taiba, for example, and other Pakistani terrorist groups. But to what degree do they really control everything they do? I don't know. And, for example, I don't believe that despite all the support that the United States and its allies have given Al-Qaeda over the years, that our government controls everything that they do. I think that they have their own agendas and they'll do what they want. The Americans essentially, they think they're clever. They can use these guys to kill Serbs or Russians or Shiites or whoever their enemies are, or potentially even Indians, although I don't have any reason to believe the Americans are behind that. But overall, they've been backing this, extremely, revolutionary political Islam for these, what you might consider to be very minor interests and ends around the world. Breaking Kosovo off from Serbia, that's worth committing high treason on Osama bin Laden's behalf? No way, right? And so they've been willing to do that. And yet this whole time, and look, I'm no expert on every different sect of Sunni Islam, but I can tell you that I know that it's true, right? That there are millions of Salafi and Wahhabis who are, the Wahhabis, they say, are the most literal interpretation of the original texts, where the Salafis say, oh, we should live like it's the 7th century, because that was when everything was perfect under the days of Muhammad. This guy, well, There are millions of people who are that radical and that fundamentalist, call them that far to the radical right of Sunni Islam, who are not political, who don't participate in terrorism or really politics at all. You know, most religious fundamentalists around the world are quietists, and that is they've been instructed by their religious leaders that God made the current king the king. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the king, would he? And it's
Right.
not your place to question the king if God's the one who put him there, is it? So you shut up and go to mosque, go to church, go to whatever temple and obey and leave the civil authority to somebody else. That's almost the universal message of religion. You might even think it's why religion was invented. But hey, anyway, you know, the vast majority of even very radical religious fundamentalists in Sunni Islam are not political. Even at the height of the Islamic State, you had like 100,000, maybe 150,000 fighters, and most of those were just local Iraqi conscripts who really didn't have a choice but to join in the first place. The Islamic State said, calling all Muslims. Pff, nobody came. There's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Nobody showed up to fight for the Caliph Ibrahim just because he said that God ordained him the Caliph. That didn't seem to impress anybody, right? So I think that's an important part to keep in mind about all of this here. And I don't really know exactly how all the different Muslim sects interacted with each other in the days before World War II and all that. But I know that since World War II, Britain and the United States, in concert with the Saudis and then later with the Pakistanis, have worked very hard to cultivate the most intolerant, the most extremist, the most head choppinist of the Salafi terrorists in the mold of Osama bin Laden. Even the Muslim Brotherhood itself was created by Britain and Saudi Arabia in the first place. Now, does that mean that without them, everybody would be a Sufi and just, you know, like a Muslim Buddhist who just wants to whirl and get along or whatever? Maybe not. But it is the case that the Western intelligence agencies have used the Saudis to encourage the absolute worst of these religious kooks to be their terrorist mercenaries, mostly because they don't mind dying. So they're very effective mercenaries when you want to send them out there and get some dirty work done. But then, man, I'm sorry, but September 11th, even if you're the world's worst cynic, September 11th should have been the end of that. The fact that David Petraeus and associated traders would go back to supporting these men after September 11th and after Iraq War II, where they were the worst part of the Sunni insurgency that killed 4,000 of our 4,500 guys that died in that war. For Petraeus and Hillary and Obama and the rest to go back to supporting al-Qaeda in Libya and then in Syria and then in Yemen since then is absolutely the highest treason, unforgivable, unbelievable, and intolerable that they would be able to do that and get away with it, and especially for all these years. I mean, they took the turn back toward bin Laden in the spring of 2011. And here we are talking about it in 25, like it's just a curiosity of history, right? And when they've essentially had us back on the side of the bin Ladenites ever since then.
Thank you so much for talking to me, Mr. Horton. This was a great conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be with you.